I am excited and honored today to have our chapter president from the Mid-Atlantic and Southeast region here, Howard Lubert. Had the opportunity to work with Howard now for a number of years. He is specialized in his term sheets. For any Keiretsu members, they know what it means when Howard Lubert's term sheet is being syndicated to us. And we're excited to have him to share a little bit more knowledge about his thoughts on cap tables, dilution, and things we can do to really help better educate ourselves as we look to invest in these companies and support our entrepreneurs. So Howard, I'm going to go ahead and turn the meeting over to you. Thank you so much for being here. We're very grateful and appreciative.
Thank you, Brianna. Okay, so in the next 28 to 30 minutes, I'm going to walk you very quickly through a presentation that is an abbreviated version of a 90-minute workshop that we've done now once this year and we'll be doing again in the fall. Obviously, you're all welcome. If you look in the chat box, you will find the URL that will take you to the download secure area where you can get a copy of this handout and the Excel workbook for the cap table that's in use here. So again, as I just pointed out, this is an abbreviated version of an hour-and-a-half program. We teach the due diligence workshop here on the East Coast once a quarter. I know that the Pacific Northwest Rockies region typically does it on a monthly basis. For those of you that are intrigued as a result of getting through this session, here is the link, which by the way is also in the handout. Here is the link to the captured version that we did on April 21st that goes into greater detail and we'll be able to go into today. If you have not read Brad Feld's book, Be Smarter Than Your Lawyer and Venture Capitalist, I urge you to consider getting a copy of it. Here's the takeaway quote that I really enjoyed as a result of getting through his book. So why are we focusing today on cap tables? Because obviously they spell out how big a piece of pie each and every one of us owns. Here's some interesting statistics based on some informal polls that we've done here over the last 4 or 5 years, as well as from a number of other angel groups that we syndicate with. It turns out that about 25% of all angel investors read the due diligence report and the term sheet. And of course, the term sheet would not be complete without a cap table. It turns out that about 50% of all potential investors do review the term sheet and disregard the due diligence report. But about 99% of us open up to the cap table and study it as a prerequisite to making a decision to invest in a deal. So allow me to set what I refer to as some typical classic ground rules as to what a cap table needs to look like and how it has to flow. So cap tables, just like when you open a book and you read something, a cap table should always flow top to bottom, and it flows top to bottom by time, and it flows left to right by events. And that will become, I think, very evident as we start to look at some investments. But before we do that, and we look at a typical cap table, it's important to point out that there are actually 2 forms of cap tables. The first form is what's referred to as the investor ledger, and it includes one line for every single investment, regardless of the number of times an investor comes back and invests in a deal. There is a single line in an investor ledger for every single investment, and it captures the details of that investment, and they typically look something like this. They can have additional information like contact information and so on and so forth. The Social Security EIN column might be hidden from view when this is distributed, if at all, for obvious personal security reasons. But as you can see, this cap table basically captures financing events as they happen. And let me just call attention to the section that's headed early round, because the particular example we're going to go through includes convertible notes. And you will notice here that there are a total of 12 investors in that section that says early round, and they are separated by blank lines Because when we build a cap table, believe it or not, if we are bringing convertible notes or safes or, God forbid, a KISS into the equity round, we need to be able to account for each and every one of them, but not by individual, but by investment event. So as a quick example, you will notice that investors 1 and 2 each happened to make a $50,000 investment through a convertible note, which was done on the exact same day. And that's critical for convertible notes because the convertible notes earn interest every day they're outstanding. And then you'll notice that investor 3 invested a significant amount of money under the exact same terms and conditions on January 27th, and so on and so forth. So I've taken the time to just put some blank lines in there to recognize that we are going to take into account a total of 5 convertible notes, which really represents 12 investors in total. So let's take a look at the quote unquote summary cap table, which is the one we're most interested in. So at some point in time in this particular fictitious example, 2 co-founders came together and decided to form a company, i.e. NewCo, and it's a C Corp, as you can see from the top. And they established a pre-money valuation of $1 million, which, by the way, is just like throwing a dart at the wall. It can be any number they want or you want. And co-investor number 1, who came in and became the CEO, received 1 million shares of common in this company, and he invested $50,000. Co-founder number 2 is the chief science officer of the company, i.e. he's the guy that brings the secret sauce. He got 1.2 million shares, but invested only 25,000. The difference, of course, being the transition of the ownership of the intellectual property from him as an individual and to the company. And they were smart enough at the time they created the company to allocate 250,000 shares in an equity incentive plan. So day one, when this company was started, 2.45 million shares were allocated and accounted for a total investment of 75,000. And if you look at the numbers, you can see that the 2 founders combined own almost 90% of the company. Then along came some people that wanted to invest, i.e. they came in through the convertible notes. Those convertible notes had negotiated different cap or pre-money valuations. They all had the same 20% discount. They all had the same 7.5% interest. And they decided to standardize on what is typically the most standard of all cap tables, convertible notes. So they include interest, the discount, and or the cap, not both. I have seen convertible notes where you not only get to recognize the cap if it's less than the deal, but you also get the discount at the same time. But all of the convertible notes had a 24-month term. So we add a second column to our cap table, and as we flow down, you will notice that underneath, after a few blank lines under the equity incentive plan, we've now added the 5 groups of convertible notes. So we're still flowing down, and then we're flowing to the right, and you'll see a section entitled convertible note holders. And what you will notice there is that the total number of shares has not changed at all. That's because the 12 investors in those convertible notes actually signed up through a convertible note, which is a debt instrument. So technically, they have loaned the company collectively $800,000. So there's absolutely no change in position of ownership of shares in the company because the convertible note holders do not own any of the company. They also typically have no information rights and no management or control rights in the company. So $800,000 was brought in. The company was able to continue to grow and prosper. And now it's ready to move to its first formal investment round. And lo and behold, they come to Keiretsu and we recommend to do a Series A round. If it's here on the East Coast, it will be, if it includes due diligence from us, it will also include a participating preferred equity round, which we cover obviously in detail in our term sheet section. Ironically, the type of equity that's included almost never has an impact on the cap table. However, before you can even begin to put a cap table together, you have to be able to calculate the impact of any and all previous rounds that went into the company. The $75,000 that was contributed by the two co-founders for common is a pretty straight line event, and you'll see that in a second. But each of those convertible notes has to be accounted for. So in this particular fictitious example, we've negotiated a $7.5 million pre-money valuation. The company's looking to raise $3 million. They'd like to achieve their first close at $1 million and then have two follow-on tranches. So all three of the tranches are $1 million apiece. We're very big on warrants here on the East Coast as opposed to dividends. And the warrant coverage is designed to attract investors and get them in quickly. So those people who invest in the first tranche get a 30% warrant recognition. The second $1 million of investment gets 20, and the final third million gets 10. In addition, something that we started January of this year that has been very, very successful in helping us grow our due diligence efforts is that anyone who joins the due diligence team is eligible for additional warrant coverage if they invest in the deal. And the team lead also is eligible for this additional warrant coverage if the due diligence report is published, and of course, they also invest. So hypothetically, the person that led the due diligence on this deal writes a check into the first tranche where they get 30% warrant coverage. They would also get an additional 15% warrant coverage for a total of 45% warrant coverage to be executed anytime between typically the next 5 years. We negotiated the valuation a number of ways, but the one quick example I'll show you is mine. It's money into pre-money valuation, something that we cover in our valuation class. So the company had raised a total of $875,000. They came to us with a pre-money ask of $10 million pre. If you do the math and divide 10 million by 875,000, you get an 11.4x. The rule of thumb for my high-level, very quick valuation methodology is it almost always has to be a single digit, almost always. So we looked at 7 million divided by 875 and came up with 8x, and that was an agreeable number with the company. But we also factored in those warrants in a very unique way that's a very positive situation. So we added to the negotiation another $500,000. So the actual pre-money valuation worked out to an 8.6x based on this, and we did this deal at $7.5 million. So that included the warrant coverage, as you'll see. So before we can actually put the new column up for the Series A event, we have to know some information on calculating the convertible notes. So we need to know the size and the date of the loan so we can calculate the daily interest rate. We need to understand the terms, interest, discount, cap, all of which you've seen, and so on and so forth. And by the way, are the notes automatically going to convert into this round, and if so, under what terms? And so on and so forth, as you can see. From the calculation of the cap table, we also have to know the pre-money valuation, and we have to know the number of outstanding shares so that we can calculate the price per share and then work backwards into the table. So again, you saw a piece of this before. There are grouped together. There are 5 convertible notes that we'll be converting. The first and the second convertible notes had a 5 million cap, which is important here because the pre-money valuation is 7.5. The third is at 6. The 5th through 11th are at 7, and the 8th is at 8. So all 4 first groups have a consideration on cap versus discount. Over the 35 years that I've been doing this, we've developed a very sophisticated cap table calculation workbook that looks like this. You plug some numbers in there at the top, and it automatically calculates almost every single possible option at the bottom. I've highlighted under conversion with interest in the middle of the page, discount or cap. That's the column we're working for. So those first 2 investors who loaned the company $100,000 back on January 13th have had their money tied up for hundreds of days, a couple of years. And with the discount and the fact that they have cap in place that's much lower than what we're doing pre-money at, they are able to exercise their equity investment at $2.04 a share. The calculation from the cap table for those of us investing in the Series A is $3.06. So those early investors who took a much greater risk than we are now are basically looking at a 33% discount on their convertible note conversion. This is the cap table number 2, same concept. Cap table number 3, the rate is now $2.45, again, because of the calculation coming through. And the same is true with calculation number 4. You will notice that if you take the price with the cap, the cost per share goes up greater than with the discount. Therefore, it defaults to the discount at $2.45, and the same with the third. Here's a summary of what those cap tables look like. They all had 20% discounts. They had different caps, same interest, so on and so forth. You can see that we've calculated the number of days of interest. We know exactly how much the interest is per day, and so on and so on and so on. But let me call your attention to the bottom line. You'll notice that under the note dollar column, a total of $800,000 was loaned to the company. It generated $65,500 and change in interest. The total number of shares that these $800,000 worth of notes will acquire is in the column under shares, 385,000 and change. The impact to the company, impact meaning the price paid per share here versus the price we're paying in the Series A. The impact to the company is a net loss, dollar-wise, of $379,000 in round figures. And the company ended up having to deliver an extra $124,000, again, round numbers, in shares. So here's that impact table kind of summed up with some notes on the bottom. So today, when we invest in the Series A, $800,000 of investment buys us $261,000 and change in shares at the full purchase price. And then you will notice the offset there, as I've already explained. So when we add the Series A shares to the cap table, it looks like this. And you will notice that as you look at the convertible notes lines, again, there's no money on the line. There are now the number of shares that were calculated and the percent of interest that they owed. Also note that the co-founders that originally controlled about 50% of the company, 41 and 49, now control 23 and 28 respectively. They have been diluted significantly, almost in half, as a result of attracting $3 million after the $3.8 million after the conversion. You will also notice under the Series A column for the equity incentive plan, it's very common that we gross up that equity incentive plan to cover future hires. And so you'll notice that the $150,000 was increased to $400,000, which allowed that number to come up to 9.3%. And then the Series A preferred number comes down there. So we're going to end up with 980,000 shares for $3 million, which is 23% of the company. There's warrant coverage that picks up another 4.5%. And then there's the team warrants, and those are just arbitrary numbers that will get adjusted. By the way, I am not surprised when I get asked the question often from people, how did you calculate the price per share? And I realized that after doing it for 35 years, it's pretty straightforward for me. And then I thought back the first time I needed to do it, and then I recognized that not everyone understands that if you divide the pre-money valuation that you've agreed upon by the total number of outstanding shares prior to the round, the result is the price per share. So if you look at the top under the column that says Series A, I've highlighted the 7.5 million in red. If you look down at the bottom of the startup column, you'll notice that I've highlighted the 2,450,000 shares in red as well. And that's how that number gets calculated. So here's the impact of the warrants. And again, notice we do warrants, not dividends. Now we do this for a number of, I think, very important investor-centric reasons. Number one, when you have a term sheet with a cap table and it offers warrants, the investor has 100% control during exercising of those warrants. In the typical term sheet that discusses dividends, there's language that says something like, if and when the board decides to do dividends, you will participate. But there's no guarantee. This is a 100% guarantee. If you are an investor in this term sheet using warrants, you can exercise those warrants anytime you want. There's typically a limit of 5 years, which is part of the negotiation. But you can see the impact there. So if you look at the future purchase of all of those warrants, that generates an additional $627,500 to the company. You'll remember that we adjusted the pre-money valuation by $500,000. And so the company basically, quote unquote, gave up $127,500 for the privilege of attracting investors using warrants, versus, by the way, almost $400,000 in lost revenue for the convertible notes that came first. And the assumption here is that the due diligence team leader is investing $50,000 and the rest of the team collectively is investing $200,000, as you can see from the bottom. Obviously, the cap table is a living document. It has to get adjusted once those things happen. So here's what the total cap table looks like. You've seen every column as it flows across. When you include the equity that the convertible note holders receive, you will note that in this particular example, as a result of raising $3 million and doing the convertible note transition into equity, the Series A participating preferred holders control 32% of the company, just shy of 1/3, which, by the way, ironically, is about the number that we see on about 70 or 80% of the term sheets as we work through them. It's somewhere in the 25 to 35% range. So in summary, the goal of creating a term sheet with a cap table like the one you just saw is to create the most attractive investment opportunity that we possibly can, but at the same time, without demotivating the entrepreneur and their team. It has to be a win-win attraction. We do not want the management team to believe that they're working their 60, 70, 80-hour weeks exclusively to our benefit. And that's why we structure it this way. So take a quick look back here, Brianna. I don't see the time on my screen. I'm assuming we're getting close to cut off time.
Good. We've got about 5 minutes.
Okay. So you can download the course materials here. Again, I loaded that up into the chat area, so you can just click on that. And I guess we can use the last 5 minutes for questions.